let's jump right into this explainer. We're tackling a subject today that honestly often feels like it's pulled straight out of some Hollywood thriller. Yep, we're talking about the Ebola virus. But instead of the usual fear and sensationalism, we're going to strip all that away. We really want to dig into the actual fascinating science behind it. We'll look at what this virus is, how it operates on a totally microscopic level, and the incredible medical breakthroughs we've built to fight back.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to meet the Ebola virus, see exactly how it spreads, and then take a look inside the human body. After that, we'll cover modern treatments, and finally, what it takes to stop the next big outbreak. Let's get into it.
Section 1. Let's start at the very beginning and meet the Filoviridae family, which is the biological family tree for this infamous pathogen.
Now, Ebola isn't exactly a new phenomenon. It was actually first identified way back in 1976 during these dual outbreaks in Sudan and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Fun fact, it was even named after the Ebola River right there in the DRC. For decades, it basically just flared up in these isolated, smaller events. But then we hit 2014 to 2016. That period marks the largest outbreak in history, sweeping right across West Africa, specifically Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. Thousands tragically lost their lives, and honestly, it fundamentally changed how the whole world looks at global health security.
What's really fascinating, though, is the biological origin here. You've probably heard the term natural reservoir. That's essentially the long-term host of a pathogen. It's where the virus just lives and multiplies, usually without even making the host sick. For the Ebola virus, scientists believe this hidden safe haven is the fruit bat. The virus just quietly circulates in wild bat populations, completely cut off from human society, until some fateful interaction causes it to cross over that species barrier.
And Ebola is actually kind of a catch-all term for multiple distinct species. The Zaire Ebola virus, that's the one that grabs the headlines, because it's the absolute most dangerous and deadly to humans. Strains like Sudan, Bundabujo, Thai forest, and Bombali, they also cause the disease in humans, just with varying degrees of severity historically. And then there's the Reston Ebola virus, which fascinatingly mostly affects animals. It really just goes to show how incredibly specific these viruses can be to their hosts.
All right, moving from the virus itself, let's jump into Section 2 and look at exactly how this pathogen makes that jump, and more importantly, how it transmits from person to person.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is a little myth-busting. Unlike the common cold or COVID-19, Ebola does not spread through the air. You literally cannot catch it from casual conversation, or a mosquito bite, or safely prepared food and water. It needs a much, much more direct route. Initially, people get infected through contact with infected animals or bushmeat. Then, human-to-human transmission requires direct contact with infected bodily fluids. We're talking blood, vomit, sweat, and semen. It can also spread through contaminated medical needles, and tragically, through traditional burial rituals, where families are in close contact with the deceased.
Okay, Section 3. Now we're zooming right into the human body to see the incredibly high stakes of this infection and why it progresses so aggressively once it enters the bloodstream.
Let's track this terrifying step-by-step progression. Step 1 is the incubation period. That lasts anywhere from 2 to 21 days. The virus is in there, quietly replicating, but the person is completely asymptomatic and, importantly, not contagious yet. But then Step 2 hits like an absolute freight train. We're talking a sudden high fever, profound weakness, muscle pain, a really sore throat. At first, it looks a whole lot like malaria or typhoid fever. And then we hit Step 3. The disease just rapidly escalates. Severe vomiting and diarrhea, external bleeding from the gums or nose, internal hemorrhaging, and eventually organ failure and shock.
To really understand why this happens, we got to look under the hood at the pathophysiology, the literal mechanics of how the virus takes down the body's defenses. The Ebola virus acts like a biological wrecking ball. It directly attacks our immune cells, so it's turning our own defense system against us. It goes after the lining of the blood vessels, the liver, the kidneys, and this triggers massive system-wide inflammation. Because the blood vessels get so damaged, they actually start to leak, which leads to extreme fluid loss and these bizarre blood clotting abnormalities. Your body literally loses its ability to maintain blood pressure. That rapidly causes shock and multi-organ failure.
Because of this rapid cascade of failing organs, the outcomes are just devastating. Depending on the specific outbreak, the quality of medical care nearby, and the exact virus strain, the fatality rate ranges from 25% to a staggering 90%. Just let that number sink in for a second. At its absolute worst, 9 out of 10 people who contract this virus will not survive. Facing a mortality rate that high, you really have to ask yourself,
Can modern medicine actually fight back against something this lethal? When your own immune system is being hijacked so violently, is there any way to tip the scales back in favor of the patient?
Well, the answer is a resounding yes. Let's pivot into Section 4 and check out the modern treatments and vaccines actively saving lives today.
The very first step to fighting Ebola is confirming you're actually dealing with it, which, as you can imagine, is incredibly dangerous work. Diagnosis has to be handled in high-security labs using advanced stuff like PCR and ELISA tests. Once it's confirmed, even before any specialized meds are given, doctors immediately start aggressive supportive care. You have to replace those massive amounts of lost fluids with IVs, balance electrolytes, give oxygen therapy, and use medications just to artificially support their crashing blood pressure. Keeping those baseline systems running is what gives the immune system a fighting chance.
But supportive care isn't our only weapon anymore. This is where human ingenuity truly shines. We have specific, targeted tools now. The Erbevo vaccine is just a monumental achievement in public health, effectively preventing infections from that deadly Zaire strain. And if someone is already infected, we now have approved monoclonal antibody treatments like Inmazeb and Ebanga. Think of these like lab-made guided missiles. They literally bind to the virus and stop it from entering our cells. These treatments have completely changed the odds of surviving an infection.
All right, Section 5. Let's zoom out to the macro level. Treating patients individually is absolutely vital, but to truly defeat Ebola, we have to look at how global public health systems coordinate to stop the next outbreak.
Stopping Ebola takes a multi-layered defense system. It starts on the personal level, right? Frequent hand washing, strictly avoiding contact with sick folks or their fluids. Then you scale up to the hospital level, requiring rigorous infection control. We're talking head-to-toe protective gear, gloves, masks, goggles, gowns, all just to keep the healthcare workers safe. But the community layer is arguably the most important. Outbreaks are stopped through safe burial practices that respect culture while stopping transmission, early isolation of the sick, really meticulous contact tracing, and widespread public education.
But as we talk about fighting outbreaks, we absolutely have to remember the survivors. Because beating the acute infection, that's not the end of the story. Surviving Ebola often means dealing with months or even years of severe complications. The virus can actually hide in parts of the body the immune system has trouble reaching. That leads to chronic joint pain, extreme fatigue, hearing loss, and even severe eye problems. Add that to the profound mental health trauma of surviving such a terrifying ordeal, often while losing family members to the disease. Post-Ebola care is a massive, critical part of the health response.
Ultimately, an Ebola outbreak is never just a local problem. Because it spreads so fast through close contact and has such a high fatality rate, it causes massive fear and social disruption. It can easily and completely overwhelm local healthcare systems, rendering them unable to treat not just Ebola, but everyday emergencies. And that is exactly why it demands massive international cooperation. Groups like the World Health Organization, the CDC, and Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, they are absolutely vital. They bring the resources, the labs, and the personnel right to the front lines to keep the whole globe safe.
So, we've journeyed from the discovery of this virus back in 1976 through its devastating effects on the body, all the way to modern marvels like monoclonal antibodies and targeted vaccines. But given everything we've just explored about how rapidly it moves and how deeply it disrupts societies, a critical thought remains to be pondered. With vaccines and treatments finally in our arsenal, are we truly prepared to stop the next deadly outbreak before it even starts? Keep asking questions and stay curious.